Okay, here we have an Econoline, Ford Econoline van with a Triton engine, and these engines seem to have a problem with leaking intake manifold gaskets. There's an aluminum crossover bar for the coolant right here, and in front of the intake, my particular 5.4 liter has a plastic intake manifold, as you can see back there. And right where this cast aluminum crossover thingy joins the head, it has a thin piece of plastic, part of the intake manifold, sandwiched between it. And as you can see, it's just seeping coolant like crazy and turned into a big glob of goo over here. It's filling up the intake, or the lifter. Actually, these engines don't have lifters, but the area between the heads and the block, what used to be called the lifter valley, fills up with coolant. It runs down the back of the engine, transmission bella housing, and it looks, from the underside, looks like it has a rear main seal leak or something, but you can see it's coming down from up top. And if you look on the other side, let's see if I can get my light to shine there. Well, I can't really see it with this lighting situation, but I can see some seepage happening over here on the other side, on the driver's side as well. It's starting, and it's just making a huge mess under here. It leaves an oily residue on the bottom of the engine, and when you're driving, the wind blows it on the transmission oil pan, and it's all gooey, and it actually makes it all the way to the back of the van, and the wind wraps it up on the back door of the van. There's little like oil splatter looking things on the back, so this can get pretty ugly here. And this job looks to be pretty ugly. You got to pull the intake manifold off, and from things that I've seen and read, the plastic intake manifold right in this area, about 50% of the time when it's leaking, is cracked and you have to get a new intake manifold. So hopefully that won't be the case, but I am not looking forward to taking this intake out, because it's pinched under the body there, but I've got to do it. Here's a better shot of the gooey mess that the intake coolant leaks leave. That's where the plastic wafer thing coming off of the intake manifold gets sandwiched between the head and the aluminum crossover. It has gotten really bad really fast now, and it fills up the little valley down there with puddles of coolant and goo. The coolant tank doesn't actually drop that fast. It kind of just seeps out and it goes down slowly. I have had to top it off a few times. And on the other side it was dry, but probably in the last year, there we go, there's a good shot. It's seeping now, both sides. There it is, trickling down the block right there. It's one of the dumbest designs I've ever seen. Bolts go from underneath the plastic piece up into the aluminum crossover, so you cannot take the aluminum crossover off without pulling the whole plastic intake manifold off. And the plastic wafer thing underneath that aluminum there. There's a lip on the inside that likes to crack and fall away inside, and then the gasket, either on the top or the bottom, has no support, and it just squishes into the coolant channel and it seeps out. I don't know why they didn't make that whole thing separate from the plastic intake. That would have made a lot of people's life easier, but they didn't. Okay, so I got the throttle body off now, and it kind of feels like a big accomplishment at this point. It really opened up a lot of room in there, and it's making me feel like getting that intake manifold out is a lot more doable now that the throttle body's out and there's all this room to work with in there. Here it is. As you can see, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that hold it to the plastic intake. 8mm heads on them. You got this big nut on here that holds this EGR tube on that you have to crack loose. I didn't have anything big enough except for vice grips, and it loosened up real easy for me. All these valves and things I just left on, they came with it. Unplug a wire here, or a pigtail here, here, throttle position sensor here, so there's 1, 2, 3 pigtails to unplug. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, those are a pair. 4, 5, and where's that other one? 6 vacuum hoses. 6 vacuum hoses, 3 pigtails, 4 bolts. There's some other brackets kind of around it that you'll have to take off. And of course the intake plumbing. And some of this stuff you have to work from the inside of the van with the doghouse cover off, and you're kind of contorted there laying between the seats and stuff, so that's not that fun, but here we are. Okay, so I got the intake manifold out of this thing. You can see this water jacket right here where the majority of it had been seeping out. And all the way back here you can see that it had been seeping probably across the top and then spilling over, and that trough is all filled with coolant and goo down there. It had been starting to seep out of this one a little bit, and there's not enough room with the radiator and the shroud in. You can't get it out the front, so you have to make sure all your plumbing in the back is enough of it's disconnected. There's a couple of air conditioning hoses that you'll have to lift up and hold up back there with the doghouse cover off, and the block is pretty low back there, so there's enough room that the intake will just pull right out the back on the inside of the van and you can take it out. I left the fuel rails and injectors and everything on it. They'll all come out real easily with it. Just disconnect the fuel fitting connectors back there, and the common issue with these plastic intakes is right here. This little plastic wafer that pops out the front gets sandwiched between that coolant manifold, crossover manifold there, and the head. And this molded plastic, there's a O-ring groove molded into it, and it leaves a skinny lip on the inside. That is the wall that keeps the O-ring stable in there. And where's the chunk that broke off? I don't know where it is, but anyways, you can see how a chunk just busted out, and then the O-ring can just kind of squirt inside, and no vertical pressure can be exerted on the rubber seal after that happens, because there's nothing to hold it from going sideways. So that O-ring was actually split in half and rolled over right there. And this one was seeping too, although I haven't found any cracks yet. So this did have 265,000 miles on it, so rubber pieces are getting pretty hard by this point, so that's not too much of a stretch. And this big chamber on the bottom of this thing is the main reason you can't pull it out the front. It's just big and bulky and in the way. There's enough room in the back where it can come out the back pretty easy. So this actually wasn't as much of a nightmare as I thought it was going to be. But it is kind of tedious and awkward to get to some things in there. You have to come from the front and the back, and I recommend park the car where daylight can get to it, because it's really dark in there, and you won't have to use flashlights and drop lights as much that way. Things are easier to see, and I am probably going to have to buy a brand new intake. The word is that the one that Ford makes, the original one, is the best as far as proneness to crack and the thickness of the plastic, and the intake runners aren't choked down like some of the aftermarket ones. And looks like you can get one for about $250 on Amazon, so I might go that route. There's really no way to fix it unless you want to risk JB welding or epoxy in that back, but I'm a machinist and I'm pretty used to that sort of thing, and this doesn't look like a great candidate for that sort of thing, especially as hard as it is to get this thing out of here. So anyways, that's what it's like.